serious issues.
Chinese interference?
Huh?
Chinese interference?
Chinese. Could have been. Who knows, you know? Who knows? It's probably hacking. No, I keep them unhacked. They're unhackable. I got all kinds of firewalls and all kinds of other stuff, but you can't. I've had more hard drive failures than I bet most people have ever experienced in their whole life. I don't know what it is. I run them 24/7, but still, you ought to get more than 20,000 hours out of those suckers. But anyway.
Try impact maintenance.
Impact maintenance. You know, actually, yeah, malletization is a good technique, and I've used that before. Malletization is a good technique to use on some of those things. All right, well, we're gonna hop in, but I was thinking about some stuff that questions you might have. You should have these questions. Here is theos, and the plenum of everything. The Greeks is a Greek worldview. To a degree, our worldview, philosophically. Does anybody have a philosophical worldview anymore? I don't know. You know, I do. I hope we do. But we did. We used to teach it. But the Greek worldview, the plenum of everything, and theos. Theos created the cosmos. And this is the cosmos. And within the cosmos, he created gay. And also there's philosophia. Philosophia. Now you might ask the question, well, where are the gods?
Little g gods?
Yeah! Where are the gods? Where are the little g gods in this thing?
Not created yet.
Probably in the
What's that?
Not created yet.
Well, actually, they are created, but this is what got Socrates in problem. This is what caused Socrates' problem. This is the worldview of the Greeks in the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and even before then. Okay, this is their worldview. So what are the gods?
In the cosmos?
In the cosmos. The cosmos is filled with the little g gods. This is the problem the Greeks had. What's the problem?
Well, they were created.
Who created? Who created? This is why when Paul, go back and look at your Acts. When Paul went to the Greeks, he said, I want to talk to you about your
Unknown God.
unknown God. You have a thing, and actually it doesn't say unknown God exactly. They knew, the Greeks knew there was a problem. In fact, the Greek gods knew there was a problem. Supposedly in the Greek worldview, the cosmos happened. And now the cosmos came what do they call those guys? Kronos and his buddies, the Titans. The Titans, right? And the Titans were the initial creation. And the Titans created gay. The Titans created gay within the cosmos. But the question has always been, who created the cosmos? And that's what Paul was answering their question. And so in Acts, that huge question the Greeks had, and this is, like I said, what got Socrates in a really big problem. Because Socrates argued this, and what is the only conclusion you can obviously make?
God's
There's
outside.
another.
Remember the Greeks. The Greek worldview is a logos to telos, right? Okay, I don't want to teach huge literature stuff or huge things, but we know about a telos, right? What? Oh, that's okay. It gets excited. Sometimes it even flies off. Okay. I don't care if you believe in Big Bang. I don't care if you think about Big Bang. What does Big Bang prove?
God created.
Well, it proves, okay,
Something.
I argue, what's that?
Something from nothing.
Well, not exactly. The Big Bang says that there was a Big Bang, which is a creation event. There was a creation event, right? A creation event. And what does a creation event have to have?
Creator.
Well, what we say in philosophy, and that's not incorrect. You're not incorrect, but in philosophy we call it a telic cause. A telic cause. Telos, telic cause. What is a telic cause?
Ignition source?
Well, remember, a telos is not really a conclusion. A telos is a beginning, right? A cause. But it's also, what is a conclusion? A cause. Are you getting this? A telos, you know, a direct translation of a telos is a vanishing point. Right? The vanishing point goes from the beginning to the end. That's an omega. That's a theta. Omega.
Yeah, there you go.
The alpha to omega, right? So the telic cause, a telos, can be a cause, and a cause is also a conclusion. So when we say a telic cause, that is the beginning and end cause, right? To have a telic cause is a thing. What do you have to have a telos? A logos. A logos in the Greek, okay? The Greek logos, and here I'm going back into good stuff. In the beginning was the logos, the word. That's from John. But what did it say in the beginning was theos. And with theos was the Hagios Sophia, or the Hagios Pneuma, and God Amard in Hebrew, which is in God Logos. So the beginning was the Logos. Jesus Christ is pictured as the Logos. Jesus Christ is the telecause. He's the Logos that creates the telecause, which causes a Big Bang. My point is this. Okay, the question today that we have in science, who caused the Big Bang? Stephen Hawking said, what did Stephen Hawking say caused the Big Bang? Oh,
He doesn't know.
well, no, he did. He said, it's obviously a previous group he believed in expanding, contracting universe. So he said, obviously, when the universe contracted or expanded before, there was a super intelligent technology people. And they were the ones who set in place the readiness for the next contraction for the Big Bang. They were the ones who caused the cause. Well, then you got to ask the question,
Where did they come from?
where do they come from, right? Well, if you talk to these cosmologists, not cosmetologists, cosmetologists are the ones who do your makeup, but cosmologists, they will tell you that the big deal of the world is, oh, these, well, super intelligent alien creature thingies. Well, that sure sounds like God, doesn't it, right? There's all these little G-gods in there. Guess what? They're asking the same questions the Greeks were asking 3,000 years ago. No kidding. 3,000 years ago, the Greeks were asking these questions, and they came up with a great answer. We don't know, but it has to be this way. And so we get, in the first century, by the way, they answered the question. And guess what? What did Judaism do? Answer the question. What did Christianity do? Answer the question until today, and then we have no clue, right? No one knows anything about it.
Well, at least they said they didn't know.
They said
They
they
don't. They said admit they don't know.
Yeah, today I'm not sure they admit they don't know anything, but they don't know nothing. You know, it cracks me up. You know, this is what we call, these are the basics. This is the stuff that's the basics of philosophy. I mean, well, what are they teaching the kids in school? I don't know what they're teaching the kids in school anymore. I mean, I don't know why they would even teach them some of the subjects they teach them before they can do basic math, right? They can't do math and science. They can't figure out, you know, basic stuff that we have in science. So why would you teach them, for example, evolution or creation events without philosophy or whatever? Just saying. Anyway, the words of the day, pick some really fun words. And I want you to notice something about these words. Let's see. Apokitea. Apokitea. And I gave you the notes here from the Strongs and Vines. Apo means off. Kitei, and this is, let's see, what's the basis of this word? Kimei, to lie outstretched. So lie, let's see, lie outstretched. All right, it says literally or figuratively, to lie outstretched. And this word means specifically to be reserved. All right, to await figuratively. In Greek, remember Greek is super concrete. And you say, well, why do we have this word in what we're studying in Hebrews? Hebrews is pretty complicated stuff, right? And the words that we get are very complicated words. This word means to be chillaxing. It means to chillax. That's why it says to be reserved. In other words, if you're off lying outstretched, you're waiting for things to happen. Now, we don't do this in our society, right? We sit down in a chair if we're going to wait, right? But what did they do in the Greek world?
Climb.
Well, yeah, you laid underneath a tree. Where did Jesus find the disciples? They were laying under a fig tree, right? Or they're laying under a tree, you know, waiting for work. They're doing something, I don't know, on the seashore. Maybe they're getting a tan. But in the ancient world, you didn't sit because it was uncomfortable. You had no place to sit on. So you generally would just lay down. And this is what this word means specifically. It means figuratively. And remember, we look at both, because figurative in Greek, of course, to us, figuratively is not to await. Figuratively to await. If I told you that I was sitting chillaxing, you would probably assume that I was waiting, right? That I'm waiting for something. So, in any case,
Slacking.
you're slacking off. Yeah, you could be slacking. There's another Greek word for that. This one, A-E-N-E, this has got a really strange, what do you call it, declension. But the word is, this first one comes from, let's see, Anna, and Pharaoh. Anaphero. The basis of this word is anaphero. The reason I want to give it to you, remember we have pro-pharaoh. Pro-pharaoh is where you bear to God. And then we had the other pharaoh, where you bear to the marketplace. Do you remember those? We were talking about those in the early part of Hebrews, and it's continued. Because pro-pharaohs, or pro-pharaoh, is what you do to God. That's the wave offerings, or the born offering. So when you offer to God, you pro-pharaoh to God. Now we have another word, anaphero. And you say, well, anaphero, whoa, this is really cool, because this is just like, you know how we have diabolo, and we have parabolo, and we have hyperbolo, right? So we have these constructed words that have specific meaning that are very important within the Greek construct. But then we have this word, which is very important, the pro-pharaoh, the other one about the bearing to the marketplace. Remember when we have a pharaoh to the marketplace? Where do the sacrifices go? To the market. That's in the Greek culture, you sacrificed to the gods, and then you took, that's how the priests made their money. They took the stuff to the market, and by the way, that's how you made your money, because you had to bring it to the market. Anna means specifically up. Up or at. Up or at. And this means to bear. So at bear, up bear, specifically in Greek, to take up. To take up. To take up the sacrifice. And the thing is, these always apply to the sacrifice. The Pharaoh words are not just, you just don't bear stuff. You can Pharaoh stuff in Greek, that is to bear it. But when you add a prefix to it, it generally implies that it's a sacrificial word, or it's a word that's a sacred word in Greek. So we have, like I said, the different pharaohs, especially within the context of the Greek. So let's go back. We were at 26. And we've already gone through the Greek in 26, so what I want to do, I'm going to read the NIV, and I'm going to read the literal translation of it, and then I'm going to read a more general translation so we can understand a little bit better, and we'll talk about it. 26, this is chapter 9, 26. Then Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world, but now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Now, the literal to this is, thereupon, and bear with me, thereupon it was himself many times to experience a sensation off a disposition of orderly arrangement, of creation. But just now, one time, at entire completion of the age, he was rendered apparent in the cancellation of missed the mark through the sacrifice of himself. Okay, so here's a more clear translation in clear English. Thereupon it was himself many times to experience suffering caused by the resulting creation. But just now, one time, in entire completion of the age, he was revealed by cancellation of sin through the sacrifice of himself. This is really an interesting statement. Remember, this is Hebrews in a nutshell. So this is the Greek worldview that we should know. And here is Theos, and here is Christ. Let's see. Let's draw him as let's see, the Rochai. So Rochai. There's Jesus Christ, right? Jesus Christ is God. And according to Hebrews, this has been this thing through the whole Hebrews. The meta-epithumia that was the sacrifice of Christ, the infinite line of the sacrifice from God to man, went from Christ to God and God to Christ. The reason this is important, and this is what they've been talking about the whole time, is in the Hebrew sacrifice, the priest sacrificed the sacrifice, and the scent of the sacrifice went from man, from gay, to Theos. But what about the other way? There wasn't another pathway back. Man was offering sacrifices to God, and God enjoyed the scent of the sacrifice because of his obedience, right? But there was no connection because of the problem that was caused by man at the beginning. I mean, this goes back to huge stuff within the theology or the theological background. So we're touching, this is Hebrews, we're touching the theological pool because that's what Hebrews is all about. Okay, so with Christ, who is also God, his sacrifice went all the way up. And I think what's really important about this, let me read it again in the NIV. Then Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Here is the translation of this. Thereupon it was himself many times to experience suffering caused by the resulting creation. All right. If Christ himself many times experienced the suffering caused by the resulting creation, who is Christ? That means Christ has got to be God. This, I know it's repetitive, right? But how can, we've got to be repetitive to explain. Brown was a dummy. How can you read this in Greek and not get it? You know what I'm saying? Brown, the guy who wrote what's that thing called? The Da Vinci Code, right? And he said, all this stuff was written way late date, and, the church was hiding the fact, and Jesus, they never equated Jesus with God. Jesus was some, man that came on earth and, magic, this kind of stuff. Look, Hebrews is telling you flat out, without a doubt, that they assumed that Jesus was God. The language it's used is obvious. Otherwise, how could Christ, and I think it's really interesting that the way they've written it in the NIV does not, it doesn't contradict, but the strength of the Greek is very powerful in showing us that Christ as God suffered because of the creation. We can't separate Christ from God, right? They're the same being. They're the same creation. They are, okay, I'd say it again. This isn't my idea. This is straight from C.S. Lewis and straight from the thing. So, if I have a three-dimensional being, here is a three-dimensional shape on a two-dimensional part. How many projections are there of this three-dimensional, this is a three-dimensional thing in a two-dimensional space. How many projections are there in space?
There's height, length, width.
Hmm?
Is that what you're talking about? The height, the length, the depth?
There's a height, a length, and a assumed width. Right?
Three exposed, but 6 faces.
There are 6 faces, but you can't see the 6. You can only see how many? 3. Okay? In reality, there are 6 fascia of this. Now, God is a 4-dimensional being. And I said this before, and people kind of don't understand this. I'm going to go back to Augustine. Augustine wrote this verse. This is like 2nd century, 3rd century Christian. Augustine was one of the greatest early philosophers of Christianity. Augustine wrote that God is a 4-dimensional being. What's the 4th dimension?
Time.
Time. So God sees time as, you know, we see 3 dimensions all at once, right? That's 3 dimensions. God sees 4 dimensions, according to Augustine. Now maybe he sees more than that, but there are 4 known dimensions. So he sees height, breadth, width, and he sees time. He sees time all at once. So he sees the telos. He sees the beginning, and he sees the end all at once. He knows everything that's going to go happen, right? Not everything that is happening is what his will, but we've talked about that before. I'm not going to go into that. In any case, a 4-dimensional being projected into 3 dimensions is going to have how many fascia?
Right?
It has to have 3 fascia. A 3-dimensional being in 2 dimensions has 2 actual fascia. Do you see this? It's an assumed width, but it's actually a length and a height, right?
Right.
This is assumed. I've drawn it. But when I have a 4-dimensional being that is projected in a 3-dimensional space, that logically means there has to be 3 fascia. In other words, how you are looking at the being determines how you are seeing it. So for example, I could draw this, it would look the same, right? But if I drew this to show the different fascia and rotated it,
Still only going to see 3.
I'm just going to see one thing, but a different side of the one thing, right? But a 4-dimensional being in the 3 dimensions shows 3 parts. And the 3 parts we know, we have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Hagios Pneuma. They're all 3 God. Same God. You notice in this picture? The metapithumia, the Son, God the Father. They're all the same. Same thing. That's the 3-dimensionality of God. So, when it says, thereupon it was himself many times to experience suffering caused by the resulting creation, but just now, one time, at the entire completion of the age. So the completion of the age, what age have we entered into according to Hebrews?
Messiah.
We are in the age of the Messiah. This is very important because this, okay, I have argued that this is not written just to Hebrews, it's written to the Alexandrians. But the critical aspect of this is that this writing in the context is to those who are in the age of the Messiah. And that's the point. By cancellation of sin through the sacrifice himself. Now, Okay, we're gonna get to this.
Lionel, before you get started again, I'm struggling with what you read. Was sin actually canceled, or was the penalty for sin canceled? Because sin still goes on today.
Yes.
So when you're reading it, it sounds like it was canceling sin as opposed to the result of sin.
Let me get to the next one.
Okay.
And I think you will see something that's very, very interesting, okay? So let's go to, and I need to mention this quickly. There is a referral to this in the Apocrypha from the Testament of Levi. It's Testament of Levi 18:9, and here it is. And in his priesthood the nations shall be multiplied in knowledge on the earth, and they shall be illumined by the grace of the Lord. But Israel shall be diminished by her ignorance and darkened by her grief. In his priesthood sin shall cease, and lawless men shall rest from their evil deeds, and righteous men shall find rest in him. So, I'm just telling you, this is considered one of the, what do you call it? It's not a quote, it's not a direct quote, but it's a relative quote from the apocryphal documents. So it's kind of interesting. If you want to study that, look in the book of Levi a little bit in depth. It's chapter 18. Let's go to 27. We'll have to wait until 28, I think, to answer specifically your question. So hold the question. Let's see, in 28, I think is exactly it. Yes, 28 is exactly the answer. 27, just as man, this is NIV, just as man is destined to die once, and after that to face justice. Here it is in the Greek, kai, and, as hosos, down as much, it is appointed, literally, off to lie outstretched, to await. Appointed is interesting, because it's not what it means at all, right? This is one of those words where our translators kind of took a word and threw it in there, and it wasn't exactly correct. Unto is added, min anthropos, once, half act, one time, to die. Apothenesco, so apothenesco, to die off. But de, after, meta, amid, this, literally that thing, the is added, krisis. So here it is in the literal translation. And down as much as off to lie outstretched, to await, of men one time to die off, but amid that thing, decision. For against. Okay. And down as much as off to wait, of men one time to die off. So men waited for what? Men were waiting for what to happen? We could say the Messiah, we could say, what I would say the Greeks would say is, they were waiting for the reconciliation of man to God. Right? The Hebrew worldview is that man was no longer reconciled because of the sin from God. There was a separation from God. Now the Greeks didn't have that in their lexicon, right? Remember, what were the Greeks always searching for? Balance, yeah. What dikasune, what they call balance, we translate as righteousness. They wanted to be seen as righteous, and what they consider righteous was balanced. You know, they didn't really believe that they did, that, you know, a little bit bad, a little bit good. They recognized in the world that there were things, like for example, okay, if you ladies say, do I look beautiful this morning? Right? And what's the guy's answer going to be every time?
Of course
Okay? Look, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's false. 99.9% of the time it's going to be always true. But you know what? The Greeks realized this. They realized that, you know, when you have a business thing and you go up to somebody, do you smack them in the face? Do you insult them? Do you say something nasty to them or bad to them? No. You shake their hands, you bring them home for dinner, right? I mean, even if you don't like them, right? Why?
Because they have something you want.
Well, the Greeks would, I don't disagree with that. I think that's a reasonable statement. That's our view though, right? The Greeks would say what? It's a balance. It's a question of balance. Because, you know, even if I hate your guts, in my society, I want my society to be balanced. So therefore, I'm happy to go to a symposium with you, and at a symposium, what are we going to discuss? What's that? You at the symposium, they discussed all kinds of stuff. Go back and read the Platonic dialogues. Go back and read Socratic dialogues. Go back and read Aristotle's writing. Go back and read what they were doing symposiums about. The Greeks would, look, even if I disagree with you in a symposium, right? Even if we have a huge fight in a symposium, and usually they had discussions. They did logos. That was their society. Okay? In their society, they fought with words, not with, you know, I mean, they were too busy fighting their enemies. And guess what? Every one of them were trained what? They were all trained warriors. Look, do you want to walk into a group of SEALs and start a fight? You know, that is like, even if you're a SEAL, that's a bad idea. Because somebody could get really hurt. So all these Greeks were warriors. And they went to symposiums. And they sat around and they discussed things. The Greeks were into this balancing. So when somebody came to the Greeks and said, I'm talking about the reconciliation of the Creator to the creation. And what did they say?
Tell us more.
Yeah, remember Paul went to him and 1/3 said, hey, this is pretty cool stuff. I agree. 1/3 said, I'd like to hear more. And 1/3 said, you're nuts, right? 2/3 is a pretty good effect. If you had 2/3 of any crowd, you'd be happy. This is what they were agreeing with, because they knew this philosophical world design. What they didn't understand was, how did this fit together? And they were answering this question of how it fit together. And so the Hebrews, when I say Hebrews, I mean the Hebrews, the early Christians who were talking to these different groups had an answer. What did the other groups have?
Questions.
They had questions. That is exactly right. The Mysterion. What did the Mysterion say about all this? All the Mysterion could do was give you things from Gay and Philosophia. Right? What did the Hindu, you know, if they even had it, well, they did have some Hindu stuff that was coming in later. So they got the reincarnation. But the problem with reincarnation is what? Yeah, where'd you get that idea? I mean, if you're a Greek and they say, yeah, you're reincarnated, what was your first question? Well, have you ever met anybody who's been reincarnated? You know? I mean, did that happen to you? Do you know? I don't know, right? I mean, where's your proof? And they say, well, I ain't got any proof. It just happened. And you go, well, that's not the way the world is. I mean, I understand this. I mean, I can philosophically, logically explain this. I know this. I can see this within a context, right? Because I can see this world the way it is. But your view does not equate with anything that I understand. You see what I'm saying? So this appealed to the Greeks. It appealed to the Romans because the Romans loved the Greeks. It appealed to the Egyptians. They didn't have any hope, right? I'm saving up all my money so I can have stuff after I'm dead. Okay, that doesn't work very well, does it? Anyway, so it says, all right, as much off to lie outstretched to a weight of men, the time, so all they had to hope for was to die off. But amid that decision, at the end of it, a decision for good or bad. Now, how does that oppose the Greek culture and society? The Greeks did believe that you were judged, right? Everybody went to Hades. And those who were kind of goodish, you know, went to Elysian Fields. Well, those that were heroes went to Elysian Fields. All the rest of you scum, you got to be in Hades. Go watch a Disney movie to see how positive that is. You know, Disney is probably one of the best, people for helping us see how the Christian worldview is a much better worldview. whether you like, what's his name, Puddle Jump or Puddle Gum in the C.S. Lewis's books for kids, right? And Puddle Gum says, he states, what's his name's, Pascal's thing. He says, even if my belief is false, it's better to believe in hope in the world to come and live a life of righteousness, of goodness, than to have no hope at all, right? That was basically Puddle Glum's statement. I'm paraphrasing. In any case.
Lionel, since we're in an symposium,
Symposium.
I have a question. If God is four-dimensional,
Yes.
and he knows the end anytime during that continuum, why did he make it so complicated?
Well, God would say it ain't complicated, but we have made it complicated. You know,
Why couldn't he just say, okay, you screwed up, you're forgiven? Why did he have to go through all this?
well, you know, he could, except he created us to have sarks, suke, and pneuma. And I could have created robots. I could have created angels. Angels are robots. Angels, I'm not going to deal into the Satan thing, but angels are robots. Angels were created by God to be beings to serve God. Period. That's it. And that's all they can do. They can't do anything else. But he didn't create them. He did not create us to be beings just to serve God. He created us beings to be thinking and choose to serve God. That's the whole message. That's the whole message of the New Testament is we are not fated. We are not fated. We are not, as the Calvinists say, fated to good or wrong. Yes, sir.
So there is no value in love for God if you are required to give that love.
Yeah.
It's only when you love out of your free will that there's any value in it.
It is only when a human being bows down with their free will and allows their suke, their thoughts, to be on God because they have chosen it. That's the whole point of, that's the whole thing. From, as it says in the Old Testament, as for me and my house, we have chosen to follow Yahweh, right? That's also the message of the Old Testament, but not nearly as finely graded as the New Testament. Yes, ma'am.
I think that God tied his own hands when he decided and stated over and over that the wages of sin is death. And so blood was required. And that is why Jesus had to die for us.
I think you're right on the money, but it's even deeper than that. God did tie his hands because he created a being that could not supplant him, but could create something. And what man created was sin. What man created was the ability to oppose God. And so that is the thing that had to be reconciled. And the reconciliation, all sin was deposed. All sin was beaten. However, the problem is not for all sin. The problem is what?
All sinners.
All sinners, the individual. What are you going to do? It's just like today, okay? If I had a historian, I wish I could have a historian right here from, some university who's the most liberal and leftist little whatever historian that you could have. Because we could get that historian to agree with us on almost every point here. They would come down to the fact that Jesus Christ lived, died, the evidence shows that he was resurrected, the evidence shows that he was crucified, resurrected, and all these things happened because of Jesus Christ. But the person would most likely tell us what? What's that? Oh no, they wouldn't say it's a fable. It's historically proven.
That it meant nothing.
It means nothing to them. They would look at you in the face and say, well, it may mean something to you, but it doesn't mean to me.
Well,
And
that's the 1/3.
What's that? It's 1/3. That's right. And they would go back and they would say something that's absolutely foolish until we disproved it. They would say, well, bunches of religions in the past believed in messiahs and in... Do you know how many religions believed in the resurrection before Christ?
0.
0. There is no word in any other language for resurrection. Resurrection comes out of Latin. The Greeks had no word for it. They had to use anastasis or anastasis or what's the other one?
Something rise up in the marketplace.
Yeah, anastasis rise up in the marketplace. What's the other one?
Negerio eknekros.
Eknekros. Anastasis and eknekros. They had to make a form to say resurrection. They had no words for it. No religion had ever... What did the Greeks get the closest to? The closest Greeks got to was Psyche, right? Psyche died, and her boyfriend...
Orpheus and Eurydice.
Orpheus Eurydice. Yeah, Orpheus went down to Hades to bring her back, and she's the closest the Greeks ever had to a resurrection. She looked back and she was taken back into Hades. She's the only one. She's the closest they ever got. Pan died. You know Pan died? The god Pan died. He's the only god that died, but he died. I've talked about the Egyptian gods. Remember the closest one Egyptian god got to resurrection? The only reason he didn't resurrect is because he was missing a part. And he's still looking for the part. In fact, his, what's her name, Nuit, is still looking for his part. Because without his part, he can't resurrect. So, feel sorry for the guy. But it was Osiris, the Osirian, Mysterion. No resurrection until after Christ. After Christ, you get Mithras, you get some other gods in the Mysterion cycles that did resurrect. Why do you think that happened?
Kind of glomming onto the story.
They're glomming on to this idea because they thought it was such a cool idea, right? But they had no proof, no evidence. And plus, they were like little G guys. Anyway, there's a lot of this in this. The big deal is that in the Greek worldview, the Greeks knew there was a judgment. All of these guys followed a judgment. Let's go to 28 because this answers your question specifically. Here's the NIV. So Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many people, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. That's not what it says in the Greek at all. Let's look at Hebrews 28 in the Greek. Hoto, in this way, Christus was added, haphex, one time prosphero, to bear towards, into, anaphero, to take up, D is added, harmantia, miss the mark, of polis, of many, and is added, unto is added, them is added, that is added, ho, look for, ho is the, look for, ape dikomai, to fully, to expect fully, off from receive, to fully expect him, autos, or himself. Shall he appear, optomomai, to gaze at something remarkable. The is added, deuteros, second time is added, koros, at a space, harmantia, miss the mark, unto salvation. I know this is really complicated. Here's the literal translation. In this way, Christus the anointed, one time bore towards, into, took up, missed the mark of many, who expect fully him to gaze at something remarkable, second at a space, a chasm, miss the mark into safety. And here's what it literally says. I'll kind of simplify this. In this way, Christus the anointed one time bore towards, into, and took up the sins of many that expect fully to gaze at something remarkable at him, and second at a space from sin into safety. So, this is not saying at all that Christ is coming again, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. It doesn't say that at all. This is saying, number one, Christus one time bore towards and up, took up. He bore towards, he bore the sacrifice, what? prospero. He bore it towards God. And then he anaphero. He took it up to. Up to whom? Up to God. The Metapithumia. He presented the sacrifice. He presented the sacrifice to God. And when you prospero, you're presenting it in the gate, to the altar, to the God. But he additionally anaphero. So that's why they add this word in the Greek. It's anaphero. He took it up to God. And remember, we have the oranos. Oranos is here. And we have the epi-oranos. Right? The epi-oranos. Remember, they set us in place for this oranos versus epi-oranos. So, in this way, Christus one time bore towards and up, took up the sins, and it says of many. You can go for it of many. I don't think it's exclusionary. I think it's inclusionary. That expect fully to gaze at something remarkable. Okay? Because he took up the sacrifice, for sins, for missed the mark. But it says that second, okay, the first point was that he took up the sacrifice for the sins of those who expect to see God or see Christ, right? To see God specifically. But second, at a space from miss the mark into safety. So this isn't saying Christ, this isn't saying what the NIV is implying. So Christ's sacrifice wants to take away the sins of many people, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those. No, this is saying Christ, number one, sacrificed himself and bore himself as a sacrifice for what? For the sins of those who have chosen or expect to see God, right? To see heaven, to be reconciled. But for the second reason is why. What's the second reason? The second reason, and here's where I really think this word sin is wonderful in the Greek. Miss the mark. All right, so let's say we're all sinners, right? So we're living our lives, let's say we're living our lives as a Hebrew. What are you worried about all the time?
Unintentional sin.
Yeah, am I sinning, right? And you're right, all sin has to be unintentional, because if I do intentional sin, I'm toast. But we know it's all intentional, right? But I'm worried about sinning, because the sinning is going to keep me from seeing God, right? That's the problem. But miss the mark is a completely different view in the Greek worldview, right? What is miss the mark? So, if I'm afraid of sinning and I'm trying to hit the mark, what's my accuracy going to be? As a matter of fact, am I going to aim at a farther target? Am I going to do a Robin Hood and I'm going to say, there's a 300-yard target, man. I'm going to go for that. It's a piece of wood. It's about that big. I'm going to go for it, because if I miss the mark, what happens in Hebrew worldview? Yeah, it's sin. It's sin, right? The big point of this is that Jesus Christ bore the sin. The Hebrews is telling us that Jesus Christ bore the sin, right, to God. And that reconciled us to God. Now you can see God. You can see him in the person of Christ. You can see him through the Holy Spirit. You can actually see God. You are reconciled to God. But second, because of this, now you can do what?
Hit the mark.
You can aim to actually hit the mark. And by the way, if you're not afraid of sin, and I'm not saying afraid, you're not afraid of sin because you want to do it. You're not afraid of sin because it's not a consideration, right? It's not a consideration holding you back. Miss the mark is a beautiful view. Remember, I'm trying to get you this worldview of the Greeks. It's not that I'm doing wrong, it's that I'm not doing everything in my capability to achieve. So God would say, and Christ would say, do I want you to aim further? Do I want you to aim higher? Right? If second, I don't have to worry about sin, what does that mean I can do?
Go for it.
I can go for it. And I don't mean that in the Nike way, right? I don't mean that you do what you want to do. What you're doing is what mark are you aiming for?
Righteousness.
Righteousness. Righteousness. If you're not worried about sin, you can now aim further and higher. And I don't know the right words to say this. They're not saying, it's like Paul said. You know, Paul said, are we to sin more so that righteousness abounds more? That's not what he's saying. He's saying that, number one, when you're freed from sin, now you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so what did the Pharisees do all the time? They were tithing every, mint julep. They were tithing every tithe of mint and whatever they had. They were, washing every vessel, right? They were going through all these elaborate things because they didn't want to miss the mark.
Well, Lyle, didn't even Martin Luther and even some of our early Catholic history, they flogged themselves, they beat themselves. Sin, they had a hard time, and even, what's his name, the predestination guy?
Calvin.
Calvin, he struggled with the guilt of sin.
Yeah. See, I think that's exactly right. That, once you're forgiven, right? Once sin is not a problem in the world, you're reconciled to God. Now I can aim for God, right? It's not that I'm aiming for, and this is, I think Martin Luther said this right. Remember, he didn't say you don't have to be a pastor or a monk or a nun, right? He said that you can reconcile with God and be righteous and seek the highest in whatever your position in the world is, in whatever your profession in the world is. That a person who's a farmer or a politician, God forbid, or a lawyer or a medical doctor or whoever you are, whatever your position in the world, whatever your profession is, that you can strive to reach the highest mark that God has set for you, right? You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be, you don't have to be doing all these things. What you need to do is aim for the mark. And I think this is probably the greatest freeing statement. It's not saying that Christ is going to come again for salvation. He's saying you are working out and I'm quoting, Paul said, we are working out our salvation in pain and suffering, right? We are working out our salvation by running the race. It's not that we are working for our salvation. The salvation has been handled, right? What are we working for? Who's our employer now? God. And whatever you're doing, you're aiming to hit the mark. Further, higher, better. I don't know how I can say this anymore. The huge thing in this is, the Hebrews, we found all kinds of small translational things. And this doesn't really take away from anything, right? As a matter of fact, it fits better, I think, within the construct that we understand for the New Testament and the New Testament logos to tell us. When we say that, number one, the purpose of Christ was to reconcile to God so that sin is no longer an issue, right? But then the secondary, most important aspect of this, well, it's important to be reconciled with God. That's a critical number one thing. But the thing that it allows you to do is now do God's will on the earth. This is even accentuated, because when we go to the next, let's see. This is, okay, we'll have a foretaste, right, of glory divine. Because chapter 10 is the next one, so we're out at chapter 9. Chapter 10. So, this is where the writers or the translators thought. Remember, there were no chapter markings, there were no verse markings, there's no paragraphs, there's no sentences. There are none of these markings in the original Greek. So when these were broken first into chapters and then into paragraphs, into sentences, and finally into versification, this is where the writers or the translators or the organizers, even in the Greek, thought this was the best place to cut it. So I'll read the first one, and I don't know if I have time to go any further, but that's okay. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. All right. What we were looking at in 9, and specifically before, was the process. The process. The process of the sacrifice. The sacrifice, you know, I drew this picture all the time. I'll probably draw this picture even more. But the big deal is the process of how does this work. And that's what the Greeks wanted to know. The Greeks are like philosophical. No, the Greeks are like physicists. Physicists always want to know, how does it work, right? How do I make an equation? Engineers say, well, I got an equation, I'm going to bound it, and I'll make it work. And I'll figure out later, right? I'll figure out, you know, if it works, it works, because I can bound the equation, I can actually make an airplane. If you left it to physicists, we never have airplanes. But if you have engineers, you can actually build some. But when we look at this next, as we're coming, this is transitioning. I don't think it's transitioning the Logos to Telos much, because remember, the whole work is a complete Logos to Telos. But the Greek study that put this into chapters and verse thought that this was a transition. And we'll look at it in two ways. We'll look at it both as a transition and as an extension of Logos to Telos. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
Why
Yes, sir.
did Christ go to hell